instead of going straight down, I started actually stepping over to the right with my front points in the ice. So I was actually putting myself in a pendulum situation if I lost my footing. And sure enough, I lost my footing and I pendulumed over and smacked right into the ice. And he thought I was going to die.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, brought to you by 180 TAC. Get out there and have some fun.
So there's this new backpacking food company called Peak Refuel, and honestly, I gave them a shot for my last backpacking trip. Y'all, it was literally the best backpacking food I've ever had in my life. I was so impressed by them that I wanted to reach out and get a deal for our listeners. So if you keep listening to the episode, I'll tell you how to save 20% off an order with them. But until then, here's the episode.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Sports Podcast. This is Travis. I've got a good one for you guys today. It's Grace McDonald. If you guys don't know Grace, she's from Toronto, Canada, and she's an attorney turned mountain climber. And instead of trying to hack an intro for her, I'm going to let her tell you all about how she got into mountain climbing and why she turned away from the rigors of law to go do something so cool. So for starters, Grace, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. So, yeah, let's jump in. I mentioned you being an attorney, so do me a favor and tell our audience about how it is you started mountain climbing and how your focus ended up growing to mountain climbing and kind of away from your standard day job.
Yeah, so I was originally into journalism and quickly realized that didn't pay much money. So I went back to school and with the sole purpose of making money and decided that law would be the right way to do that. And then about 7 years into law, with money being my main focus, I quickly discovered I was unhappy, which tends to be what happens when you do something just for money. And I made a bunch of money. That was great. But my whole life was basically dedicated to law, and not in like I got home at 9 o'clock at night way. Like I got home at 3 o'clock in the morning way. And then my BlackBerry would buzz at around 4:30 in the morning and I'd be back into the office. And this was a very regular occurrence. I worked in corporate finance, dealing with public company stock offerings and takeover bids and all very exciting stuff. But I had no life outside of law. And I was never a person who wanted my whole life to be dedicated to an office. So over the course, it took me about 4 years, I think, to actually pull the trigger and quit. It was a big decision to decide that I no longer wanted to do this. The assumption was, though, that I would kind of take a year off and then maybe go back into some form of law, but nothing like what I was doing in terms of working for a law firm or working for a company. And I pulled the trigger, I think in 2010, and decided immediately. I'd had a goals list, kind of hanging over my bed or in my bedroom where, when we moved, I would move it to different locations. But one of the things on that list was to go to Everest Base Camp. And I don't know why. I think I know why. I think because I had always had National Geographics as a kid. I had seen Mount Everest on National Geographics and decided that I wanted to see that with my own eyes. I had no intention of climbing Mount Everest, but I still thought it would be a great trip to go to Nepal and do the trek up to base camp and see it. So in 2010, when I left my job, I think it was maybe midsummer, I decided in the fall I was going to go over to Nepal and I was going to see Mount Everest. But I had also decided at that point, because I was a pretty outdoorsy person and a very active person and definitely into hiking. And I thought that, well, I'm probably going to see people over there doing some really cool stuff like climbing. And while I have no intention of doing anything epic, why don't I go and learn how to climb? Surely that must be something I can do when I go over to Nepal. So I did a little search and found out that, I could take 3-week trip and learn the basics of mountaineering and climb a 6,000 meter peak. So I signed up to do that and went over, and I was joined by 3 young guys who worked for Google in San Francisco and an Irish guy. And the 5 of us all went off with a Sherpa leader and a couple of supporting Sherpas. And we went to Lobuche East, which is not far from Lobuche, sort of 2 villages before Everest Base Camp. And we spent, about a week doing some basic, here's how to climb fixed lines. Here's what a Jumar is. Here's some basic knots. Here's how to walk in crampons. Here's how to self-arrest. Here's how to rope up and walk on a glacier. And then we went off and went for the summit of Lobuche. So this is just over 6,000 meters. And I think I hyperventilated about 200 meters from the top. And it was terrible. I thought I was going to die. I think I was just really hungry, and I was probably walking too fast. But our Sherpa guide was like, "What's wrong with you?" And he's like, "Eat." He's just like, I remember he shoved a goo gel in my mouth, and I absolutely hate those things. But it did the trick. I think it required me to breathe and then got some calories into me. And then he's like, "Okay, let's go and finish this." And so I stood up and I went and finished it. And that sounds really horrible, but the truth is I went and I stood on top of Lobuche East. And by that point, I'd completely fallen in love with this climbing thing. So I don't know when. It certainly wasn't when I was having a goo shoved in my mouth. It may have been when I stepped onto the top of Lobuche East and saw the view and realized that I had worked through a challenge. And it was absolutely stunning. It was an absolutely perfect day up there. You couldn't have asked for better views. And it was a great little group, and we'd all gotten on so well. And then we, came down and had the chance to walk over to Everest Base Camp, which by that point wasn't really even necessary because the view from Lobuche East is so stunning. But, completed the journey and then went home. And in that process, that very short 3-week process, I had fallen in love with climbing or mountaineering. And so I came home and immediately knew I wanted to go and do something else. And I started to learn more and more about, I was a total novice. I didn't even understand this concept of like 8,000 meter peaks. And I still had no intention, absolutely zero intention of climbing Mount Everest.
Still no intention after that?
No, absolutely not. But I'm very methodical about how I, work towards goals. And I had a sense even then that Everest was not the kind of thing you just rush into. And for me, part of my enjoyment of anything I take on, is the process of learning and getting better at something. So I would never be someone who kind of wants to rush to the end goal. So I knew I wanted to do something else. And I thought, okay, well, the next step should be if I'd done 6,000 meters and altitude wise, I felt okay. I clearly need to figure out my pacing and figure out eating, but let's try out 7,000 meters. And logically, it seemed to me that Aconcagua being a non-technical mountain, and also it was an opportunity to go to see a part of the world I hadn't been to. So I was going to go down to Argentina to climb Aconcagua. And went down there, didn't summit, got to about 6,600, I think. So I remember being like really happy because I just wanted to go and see more altitude, and I didn't have a sense of needing summits in my mind at that point. I know other people on that trip were like really devastated they hadn't summited, but for me, I already knew on that trip that this was like a long-term thing for me. I wasn't just going to like pop out now and then to climb a mountain. I was going to be climbing mountains for the rest of my life. Whether or not I went back to work, climbing mountains was going to have to be something that happened on a regular basis for me. So I was just really happy that I'd like upped my my altitude goal. So I can't, and it would have been great to summit, but I was still really excited because it was like, okay, I did 6 and now I had like 6.6, and okay, maybe I can try something bigger. And Interesting. I did go back to Aconcagua years later, and I remember when we turned around on that first time, I wasn't sure the guide was right about turning us around because he thought we were too slow. And years later, when I went back, I realized he was entirely right, and we still had like a huge amount of ground to cover, and we wouldn't have made it in any reasonable time. But so went back home. This would have been at the end of 2010. I'd gone on Lobuche East, and then in early 2011, like January, I think I'd gone on Aconcagua, and then I had decided, okay, because at this time it was still like, okay, I'm on my year off. I thought I was going to go back to work like in a year, and I thought, well, I'm going to go try to climb my first 8,000 meter peak, and I'm going to do that in the spring. And the standard thinking about first 8,000 meter peaks, certainly at that time, was Choyu. At that time, Manaslu was not considered a beginner 8,000 meter peak. So, and on top of it, I was going to get to go see Tibet, which I thought was very cool.
Right.
And so it would have been, I'm going to say March, April. And I went back to Nepal and got on a bus to go to Choyu and see how 8,000 meters was. And I was going to use oxygen. And I ended up in this wonderful group of people. I mean, pretty much all, I think, trying out their first 8,000 meter peak. That was sort of the standard fare then, that anybody on Choyu was kind of trying out their first 8,000 meter peak. So this great, absolutely great guide, Max. And then we had this great group of just silly, wonderful, relaxed people. And I also met this girl, Violetta, on that trip, who ended up becoming a really long-term friend of mine, and I ended up climbing other mountains with her. We were the only two girls on it, and it was a pretty incredible trip because I summited, which was fantastic. Actually, the only two people that summited were me and Violetta with Max. So it was this girl power a moment. It wasn't easy. It absolutely wasn't easy. We still look back on some moments, when we were in Camp 2 trying to acclimatize, and we were just absolutely done in. I mean, I think we were doing better than everybody else, but we could still barely find the energy in ourselves to, boil water and eat. And when it came time to kind of pack up and go back down, I remember we were trying to find every excuse to not do it. But we worked through it, and then we, went back up for the summit push. And on the summit push, Violetta wasn't using oxygen. So but I was, almost doing cartwheels because I was on oxygen. I felt so great. And it was on that trip. So I had sort of been exposed to this thinking of using oxygen or not using oxygen, and the sort of bravado behind that, and purity concept of, climbing with or without oxygen. So that was my first exposure to that. And Violetta, being Polish, was very committed to a certain style of climbing. But that was also when I realized that oxygen is awesome, and you'll be really happy if you climb with oxygen. And if you don't, you're going to be really, really miserable. And I remember coming down from the summit, and the look on her face till this day makes me laugh. And we had to lie to her because she was like, it's not far, is it? She's like, 45 minutes. And we're like, yeah, 45 minutes. And it was absolutely at least 3 hours still. But there was no way, because the look on her face was just that she was not happy. She was not a happy camper at all.
A little bit of what you don't know won't hurt you.
Absolutely. And she went on, but unfortunately, so that was one of the things I learned on that mountain. But I also learned a really other potentially deadly lesson on that mountain, because it had been a really cloudy morning. So when I actually stood on that summit, one of the great things about standing on the summit of Choyu is you're supposed to get to the summit, and then directly across in front of you is Mount Everest. And then you have this view of all these other wonderful mountains. Of course, there was so much cloud that I just had a view of complete cloud surrounding me. But it was a weird cloud because it was like the sun was out, but the sky was filled with these big puffy clouds that were just sitting really low. And when I was climbing, I remember my oxygen mask, and it was one of these older sort of Russian style oxygen masks. So it was quite big for my face, and it was pushing my glacier glasses up just a little bit. So there was a little gap between, my face and the goggles. So I thought, and I knew it, but I had thought to myself, being a newbie and such, that, well, the sun's not even up yet, really. Like, it's not like it's shining on me. Plus, it's really cloudy out, and so no big deal. Did the whole climb this way. Then I get up onto the summit, and we stayed. It was quite warm because of that cloud cover. So we actually sat up there for 45 minutes, and I took my glasses off, and Max didn't even really notice that I'd done that. And so I have all these pictures of me on the summit without my glasses on.
Oh, no.
And sure enough, we came down to the high camp and then moved back down to Camp 2. And that night at around, so everybody else had only come back down to the high camp. So it was just me and Max down in Camp 2. And at around, the sun had set, we'd eaten, we'd had drinks, and I started scratching my eyes, and it was dark. So it was completely dark in the tent. We were supposed to be sleeping. I just started getting up and really scratching my eyes. And Max was like, "What's up?" And I said, "There's something wrong with my eyes." And, he just said, "Oh, you're dehydrated." And he always said that, like, whenever anything was wrong, you're dehydrated, you just need to drink, which is usually the first thing you should always do when something's wrong. But I was certain that no, Max, there's something wrong with my eyes. And, he said, "Okay, well, just let me get my headlamp," and fumbles around in the tent. Says, "Okay, sit up." And he clicks on the light, and he just starts laughing. And he goes, "Oh, I don't know what I can say. I don't know what words I can use, but you can imagine." He said, "You are blank."
This is not an issue of snow blindness.
I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You're not going to be able to see in the morning." And it really hurt when he had turned on the light. He goes, "By the morning, you're not going to be able to see." And I said, "Great, that's awesome." And he goes, "But I need you to just chill out and not worry about it, because we can't change anything with that. And I need you to sleep." And he put some ointment in my eye and explained, "Look, this is not good, but I'm going to get you out of here. But we need to wait till the morning to do anything about this." And so he kind of wrapped my eyes up, and in the morning I couldn't see anything, and I couldn't take any light meeting my eyes. So we needed to actually wrap them with more sort of, headbands and things like that to keep all the light out from them. And,
so
sure
it
enough,
was snow blindness. It
absolutely was snow blindness. Yes. And it went on for 2 days. Yeah. 2 days before I could actually even start trying to see anything with glasses on. But we needed to get off this mountain. We had a lot of ground to cover, and I couldn't see a thing. And so, of course, Max is responsible for more than just me. And everybody else starts coming down from the high camp that morning. And funny enough, Violetta comes down, and she comes right over to the tent that we're in. And she goes, "Max, I need to see you." And he goes, "What's up?" And she says, "I have frostbite on my finger." And he goes, "Yeah, well, she's blind, so keep on walking."
We got bigger fish to fry right now. Oh, man.
And she's like, "No." And so, of course, I mean, you can imagine the issues that one goes through when suddenly they find themselves unexpectedly blind on a mountain. I needed to go to the washroom, and I had nothing but men around me, and I was blind. So the minute she got down there, it said, "Hey, before you leave, I need you to take me somewhere and help me, help me figure out how to do this." So she kindly did that. And if our friendship had not been cemented, before that, it certainly was at that point. So the point of that, at that point, it was, okay, everybody get their stuff, pack up, Sherpas, take as much as you can. And everybody go ahead and just get off this mountain, go all the way to base camp. I'm going to stay with Grace. I'm going to get her off this mountain. Now, somewhere in that, I think the Sherpas misunderstood exactly how far Max expected to get me off this mountain, because we thought it might work if he attached like a short rope to me, but it didn't really work because I couldn't tell when he was kind of heading left or right. So we ended up taking a trekking pole, and almost he would kind of shake. He would hold one and I'd hold the other, and he would shake it. And if he was going to the right, he'd shake it to the right, or going to the left, shake it to the left. And that worked really well. And that was pretty great on the more moderate terrain where we just had snow to walk through. So I just kind of kept picking up my feet high so I didn't, hit any snow or anything. We were covering ground pretty well. The first major obstacle was there's this thing called the ice wall. In the fall, there's so much snow that it tends to be like steps, but in the spring, it's very icy and it can be quite steep. And so we actually had to rappel off that because it was the springtime. Of course, I'm blind, so I'm not very good at that point at, attaching myself in for rappel. So he had to sort that out, and he hooked me in and left a safety clip on an anchor, and basically I was hooked in, dangling on this line, and I had my hand on this one clip that I would unclip when he yelled, and then I would rappel down blindly. And I knew it was just a straight rappel down, and then he would meet me at the bottom of that rappel and click me into another rope that I could then traverse over on. Pretty simple. And at this point, I mean, this would have freaked a lot of people out, I think, but I very much trusted that Max could get me out of this. All I had to do was trust him, and that freaking out wasn't going to sort of solve anything here. Right. So it was actually an incredibly calm walk down for me. I think it was an incredibly stressful walk down for Max. And I didn't really appreciate that during it. He was keeping his cool very well, but looking back on all of this, it was a pretty insane thing that he had to do, because he was also trusting me to do the rappel on my own. And so he yelled to me, but he was slightly over to the right, and I have a hearing problem. I'm have some deafness in my right ear. And instead of going straight down, I started actually stepping over to the right with my front points in the ice. So I was actually putting myself in a pendulum situation if I lost my footing as I was going down. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, I lost my footing and I pendulumed over and smacked right into the ice. And he thought I was going to die at that point.
Oh, bet.
And so he's watching me pendulum over. He thought I was going to let go of the rope and just slide down to the bottom and be dead. And I pendulumed over and I hit the ice and I just started laughing. And he was like, he started yelling, like, I can't believe you're laughing right now. You have to be the craziest client I've ever had in my life. But I'm really glad you're okay.
You're a blind woman dangling from a rope, smacking into ice,
like,
and you're having fun with
like
it.
A lawyer from Canada, she's definitely going to at least be crying. Like, right. There's no question about this.
That's great.
But he's like, you're insane. And I'm like, well, it's kind of funny, and what else am I going to do? So I ended up coming down to him, and he got me through the rest of it, and we carried on walking, and we made it down to Camp 1. But this had taken us most of the day because some bad weather had moved in and some snow had started piling up. And unfortunately, the Sherpas on our team had thought he was going to come all the way down to base camp, so they cleared out everything. We had no tents. We had no stoves. We had nothing. Okay. So Max was a little mad, shall we say. He also couldn't reach them on the radio from Camp 1.
Bring my stuff back up.
So everything was going terribly wrong. And there was no way. I mean, this was tiring for me. And I can only imagine on a mental and physical level for him how exhausting it was.
I'm sure.
Luckily, there was one other team left on the mountain. There was a Dutch team. And they had a very small tent, like one of those small 2-man tents in Camp 1. And we knew they wouldn't mind if we used it given the circumstances. They were on their summit push the next day, so they were up higher. So we got in there. But of course, keep in mind, we have no stove, we have no food, and we're exhausted. And we've got a big day ahead of us the next day. But we did have 1 can of Coke in that tent. And we spent the night sharing that can of Coke, and Coke had never tasted so good. I mean, I don't drink that stuff, but that night it was probably the most perfect thing we could have if we had nothing.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And we woke up the next morning and continued on down, but that's actually where things got really difficult because Choyu becomes quite rocky down lower. And it starts with like, okay, Grace, there's a rock on your left. Okay, Grace, there's a rock on your right. And then it becomes rock everywhere. Grace, there's just rock everywhere. So I actually started getting scared at that point that I was going to trip and like break an arm or break a leg. Because there's only so much you can do walking a blind person through a boulder field. But we did it. It just took a long time. And then eventually we got down onto sort of the glacier and onto the trail on the glacier. And sure enough, we ran into one of our Sherpas who was coming back up in the morning. And then there's all these Tibetan porters around, and they heard about the blind girl coming down the mountain. So they came out to offer, of course, for a price, very steep price.
I'll pay it.
To piggyback me into advanced base camp. And I said, look, whatever it costs. And it was funny because they wanted the money right then and there. And we're standing in the middle of a glacier. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I just don't happen to have my wallet on.
Yeah, you point me to the ATM and I'll get your cash for you.
So they piggybacked me back into advanced base camp, and it was cute because there were two of them, and they took turns, and I knew which one had me based on the smell of their hair. And they dropped me twice, and they thought it was very funny, and every time they dropped me, I took $10 off their fee.
Nice.
They didn't think that was funny. But it was cute because they carried me the way they would carry loads. So they took a rope around their forehead and then ran that rope under my butt. And it was a really interesting setup. But they wanted to take as much off of me as possible. So they were like, okay, take her jacket off, then take her boots off, then what more can we take off?
This is not a game, guys.
I'm not gonna get naked.
Exactly. I'm not sure where you're going here.
Yeah, no. So we got back into advanced base camp, and then it was a really even rockier walk down to where we could basically get into a motor vehicle, and the team was down in that motor vehicle waiting to leave the mountains. So a bunch more Tibetan porters showed up, and they all wanted in on the action. So I had easily 10 different people taking turns piggybacking me down this trail to the car. There was a van down there, and one of them was a woman actually who took me on her back. So
wow.
We got me out of there, and then within 24 hours after that, I could sit in a room that had no lights on and look out into a hallway with light, but I needed my sunglasses on to do that. Yeah, it was it took a while, but it comes back. And that was my lesson in wearing sunglasses on a mountain.
So like I said before, Peak Refuel is a new company making dehydrated backpacking food, hunting food, whatever you want to use the meals for. But they spent over 2 years researching the industry and coming up with the absolute perfect recipes for your adventure needs. The guys on my last trip could not believe that it was dehydrated meals. Their chicken Alfredo, I'm not kidding y'all, it tastes like it came out of a daggum restaurant. And it only took just over a cup of water, so every meal was just super creamy, filling, and just tasted great. And the pictures that they have on the packages are literally pictures of the food. It's not some stock image of people that never been camping a day in their life. And also, if you're a listener of the Adventure Sports Podcast, at checkout, type in ASP20 to get 20% off an order. And there are no limits to how many people can use that, and there is no expiration date on that code. Also, you get free shipping with orders over $49. So go to peakrefuel.com to learn more.
How much do they prepare you in training for that?
It's to prepare you for, you can't really prepare for snow blindness. The way you should really prepare for snow blindness is by not getting it and not being an idiot and keeping your sunglasses on, right?
Don't they stress that, this happens quickly and you don't know it's happening until it's done with? I mean, I've interviewed Brian Dickinson. I don't know if you know him in his story, but he wrote a book about it. Same thing. Just, he didn't take his glasses off up there just to look around. He had, taken his goggles off for a second, put them on his arm, and lost them. They basically, rolled down the side of Everest, and Sherpas had caught it. Well, they brought it back up to him. The inner lining, the inner lens was cracked, so he had to remove it. But what he didn't realize was that was half of 50% of his effective sun blocking, and that's why he got it. But it just makes me wonder, it's like you keep hearing this, and don't people just drill this into your head that, look, this is going to be very, very difficult to get back down if you happen to get this?
Yeah, I mean, they do. So, I mean, I don't know that they drill it into your head, right? I mean, and there's because I think you're supposed to wear your sunglasses. They will tell you, make sure there's no space, you have to have all the space covered and all of that. But, what you don't realize is, first of all, you're up high, you're not entirely thinking straight. Number two, making sure there's no space is extra work. And so whenever there's extra work going on and you're anywhere above 7,000 meters, you try to come up with reasons as to why you don't have to do that,
right.
And so I came up with the reason of, it's cloudy. I didn't obviously UV rays aren't just about the sun being out.
Right.
You know, there's UV rays out there that are reflecting off the snow and that are going to get my eyes. I know that, but in the moment I was like, oh, there's cloud out there. So no big deal. Like, it's just, you make these excuses. And then, and by that point, and then when you're up on the summit, like, you know, this is my first 8,000 meter summit. I was like super happy. I was on oxygen. I was on top of the world.
I'm going to take this in.
You know, and then you just like, I just took them off. And you know, because they fog up often. And so there's all sorts of things going on that make you want to make life easier on yourself. And through trying to make life easier on yourself, you can end up snowblind. And I definitely learned the hard way on that one. I was really, I think the further I get away from that experience, the more I realize how serious it was, because the more difficult climbs that I've been on, it made me realize that, you know, on a different mountain that would have gone really wrong. Or if I was a different person, that would have gone really wrong. You know, if I hadn't for some reason transitioned into just calm, cool, and collected, that could have been a really difficult situation. So anyway, now I'm the first person telling everyone to put their sunglasses on all the time, you know, and sunscreen too, and all that. But that'll teach you. And then I tell them that story and how serious it really can be getting someone off a mountain.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, you spend this time preparing to climb, and what you're preparing for is the ascent, you know, the acclimatization and to the exertion of the ascent to get up there. You're not preparing to come down the mountain blind. It's not something that really crosses your mind, and you can't really prepare for it. So you end up in a world of hurt by comparison, you know, for something like that.
And it's a stupid situation to let yourself get into. And I don't blame anybody. I don't blame Max. That was entirely, you know, he felt like, God, I should have seen that. Mm-hmm. And I should have noted it, and that should never have happened. But it's like, you know, I mean, most of that damage probably happened while I was climbing with that little gap, you know, between the oxygen mask as opposed to the time up on the summit. So it's, and that's on me.
Yeah. And to your point, you're
I'll never
up there.
Do it again.
Yeah, and you're thinking about a lot of different things. It's not just your eyewear that you're thinking. You have a million things that you have to think about while you're up there, and he does too. And he's, you know, thinking about it for other people too. So you can't pin it on anybody. It's just something that you take a chance by doing these kind of things, and you pulled through it, and now you have a good story to tell.
But if you mess up, and I actually had this discussion with somebody years later on the north side of Everest who, you know, chose to do something really silly with respect to their eyewear and ended up being okay, but didn't factor in the cost that would have had for the overall team in terms of other people. Like, it was just your eyes and you getting damaged, but if that happened, who was going to take you down?
Right.
Do you think it would have just been you and your Sherpa doing that? No, it probably would have been you and your Sherpa and my Sherpa and her Sherpa and his Sherpa. And what if it was our summit push and we didn't get our Sherpas? Then that's it for all of us, because you decided that's what you wanted to do. You didn't want to wear proper eyewear that day. So I think that's ultimately the lesson is we have to take care of ourselves, and that's not just to take care of ourselves. It's because we also have a responsibility to the team. What if somebody else had been more seriously injured, you know?
Oh yeah.
On the team. Like, what if somebody had cerebral edema and I became a secondary issue?
Yeah, you know, that's a good point. And you have to prepare. I mean, you know, people going up in a group have to prepare to be, you know, have the ascent turned around because of somebody you know, having an issue. You have to be, you know, of the same mind, saying, look, if somebody's got an issue, we all get together and get this person down. So be prepared that we may not make it. It may not be because of your fault, but, you know, and like you said, you got to be prepared as the person going up, thinking whatever I do can affect the rest of the group. So it's all part of the sport for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was a little surprised at the, you know, how you got into it. You said it was about 3 weeks. I guess in my mind, I'm not a big climber. You know, before the interview we were talking, and I've done a few 14ers, but you know, nothing more. But in my mind, I would think, if I have aspirations of climbing 6,000 or 8,000 meter peaks, I'm going to be training for a year, you know, and you know, and working my way up. But it sounds like you hit the road running a lot faster. than
Yeah, I mean,
would
I
have
went
thought.
to altitude really quickly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Partly because I don't live with 14,000 foot peaks in my backyard, right? That's one thing. In
You kind
Toronto,
of had
we
to go.
basically have
You bite the
nothing.
bullet. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so if I knew I was going to go over there anyway, and I didn't, this is again all in hindsight now, we don't, as human beings, until we experience altitude, have the proper respect for altitude. Like you often get this sort of bravado between, let's say, rock climbers and mountaineers, where they'll be like, yeah, but it's not really that steep,
Right.
And you're like, yeah, your thing's gravity, my thing's altitude.
Right.
They're both really crippling. I don't think I fully realized when I started this how serious altitude is. I very quickly started to realize how serious altitude is. But the more I do this, the more respect I have for altitude, and the more I realize that that's probably one of the things that we need to educate people about more than anything else. It's not so much just getting in the best physical shape of your life. There's a lot of other things going on that you can't prepare for on a mountain, or that don't require you to be in the best physical shape of your life.
Right.
Altitude is something that's that's not part of that struggle.
Yeah, and I bring it up not to point and say, you did that too fast. I think for me, it's a motivating thing to hear your story about how you got into it so quickly. Because I think, if people are thinking the way I'm thinking, it's like, well, that's not something I'd ever want to do, because I don't have a year to devote to training to do that. But you've proven that you don't have to devote that time. You can step into it. Obviously, you didn't go tackle Everest as your first mountain or anything, but you did some pretty serious climbing, high altitude climbing early on, and that's good.
I think if you have, I had a very sound cardio base, like a really long-term sound cardio base from other activities. So I think that put me in a good position to meet the demands of climbing a 6,000 meter peak. But, peaks like Lobuche East and Island Peak, even Mara Peak, they call them quote unquote trekking peaks. And what they all have in common is there really isn't much technical climbing on them at all. So you don't need a lot of climbing skill, let's say. You just need to learn how to walk in crampons. And that you can, as long as you're generally coordinated, you can figure that out, with a day of training. You need to learn how
that's your
to,
sign.
Yeah. if you need to learn how to use fixed lines, because certainly on those peaks, they're going to have fixed lines. And that really just means you have to learn how to work a Jumar or a sender, which is a fairly straightforward device. And then, you got to learn about gear. But there's lots of advice on that out on the internet, and that's a learning process too. What keeps you warm, how to function. But you're not going to start learning that on, you're not going to start learning what you need on 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 meter peaks on 14,000 foot peaks. You're just not. And in fact, I see a lot of people who come from places where they have 14,000 foot peaks in their backyard, and they think they can just run up to 14,000 feet in Nepal and be totally cool. But what you don't do when you get to 14,000 feet in the States is go higher the next day or the day after. You come back down. In fact, you come back down that day. And also what you wear on a 14,000 foot peak is not going to be anything near what you need to wear on 6,000 meters. So there's a point where you kind of got to go to the big boy leagues, and not to say that 14,000 foot peaks are not big boy leagues, having just done my first one this year.
But no, you make a good point. It is a totally different world up there.
Yeah. So at some point you have to decide to jump into that. Now, I think you should have a generally sound cardio base. I think you should have some strength in your legs. I think for your own confidence and mental strength, you probably want to do some really long days with a pack. Nothing's really going to prepare you. You're never going to walk in there and ace that first one. You're going to learn a lot. I learn something every time I do this still. And I expect to keep learning things, to be better at it or to make it better for myself. High altitude climbing is not something that just you go, you nail it, and then you're good at it forever. It's a long-term learning process for sure. And honestly, that's part of the fun of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you learned it and conquered it all within the first year of doing it, then you're going to be looking for the next fun activity to do. You're going to walk away from that one thinking, well, it's kind of boring at this point, so it makes sense. What about altitude? We were just talking about, 6,000 meter, 8,000 meter. What is the difference? How do I ask this? How does it feel? You summit a 20,000 foot peak, and then you summit a 26,000 foot peak. So what does that 6,000 foot difference really feel like? Is it drastic, or is it not that big?
You mean between the 6,000 and 8,000 meter
exactly
peak? Yes, it feels very different. So typically 6,000 meter peaks are first of all, you go for the summit from like a high camp. So you have a base camp, you hang out there, you're acclimatizing, you go up to a high camp, and then you go for it. So just in terms of like length of time out on a mountain, living on a mountain, it's much less. On an 8,000 meter peak, you're spending much, much longer going up and down the mountain, many more days out on the mountain. And often you have at least 3, possibly even 4 camps. You're exhausted before you go for your summit push, which is what makes a mountain like Everest even worse, because you're just going that much higher. It's another extra day. So it feels a lot different when you get to the top of a 6,000 meter peak, assuming you've figured out, pacing, which I hadn't figured out the first time. Assuming you're like walking at a pace it's right for you, you're warm enough, you're eating enough, then if you just take your time, then you're going to get to the top of a 6,000 meter peak. You're going to feel like the air's thinner, but you're still getting enough oxygen. You don't feel like, oh my God, I need to put on an oxygen tank, and that would change my life. And you feel quite comfortable standing on top of the summit. You could stay there for a long time, easily. So when you get to the top of an 8,000 meter peak, I mean, even with oxygen on, you're often completely exhausted, depending on the mountain. You don't want to stay there for a long time because you have a long way to go down. If you take your oxygen off, in about a maximum of 20 minutes, you are definitely going to want to put that oxygen back on, because you're going to start feeling not good at all. And without oxygen, the highest I've been without oxygen is only 7,600 meters. And I distinctly remember looking over at my friend Mark, who had oxygen on, and wanting to strangle him because he was so happy. And I was not. And I remember thinking, this is how Violetta must have felt when she saw me on Chihuahua. But and I was very cold. That's the other thing people don't realize about oxygen, is oxygen keeps you warm. And without oxygen, you get very cold.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually never thought about that. Same with hydration, but I never would have thought about oxygen in that sense.
It's the circulation and then the oxygen. It helps immensely. In fact, if you are incredibly cold, and we've done this on mountains with people who have just been, sitting there freezing, you give them a few puffs of oxygen and it changes their life. So it's a wonderful drug, and it does put you at much less risk, leaving aside the very serious things like haze and HAPE. It puts you at much less risk for frostbite.
Right. Well, and just the simple fact that it'll pick your spirits up at that point. I mean, many people get up there and just totally lose their desire to move anymore and put themselves in really, really dangerous positions.
Absolutely. When I was the next big mountain I went to after Choi was a mountain called Shishapangma, which is also in Tibet, and it is, I think, the 14th highest. It's the lowest of the 8,000 meter peaks, and I had it in my mind that I was gonna try it without oxygen, but we were gonna bring oxygen. I've since, if I was ever going to go without oxygen, I would just literally go without oxygen as opposed to giving the choice. Because if it's there, I think you will use it ultimately. Really? Yeah. But on this particular mountain, normally you don't start on oxygen until you're up at the high camp and going for the summit. I think the high camp is maybe like 7,374 meters. And
that's high.
but there's this head wall you have to
almost
climb.
25,000 feet at that point.
Oh yeah, it's quite normal to go to above 7,000 meters and then put your oxygen on.
Wow.
That's what I would absolutely always do. But on this particular mountain, there's sort of this valley. You're in a mountain valley, and then you have to climb up a head wall from about 7,000 meters to 7,400. And I was in a terrible mood, just an absolutely ferocious mood. I was being a horrible human being, and I was with Max again, and it was just the two of us again on this mountain, and a Sherpa who was ahead. And like, we had this, like, I started yelling at him, saying that, I forget even what I was saying. I was like, if you're not going to be my friend, I don't even want to climb this mountain. It was totally weird. I was in the worst mood of my life. And
Max.
he was like, that's it. I don't know why that Sherpa is carrying oxygen when you should be on it right now. And so we walked to them, and I was like, no, I'm not. I was like totally arguing. I'm not going on oxygen now. How dare you? I found it offensive. And we got to the bottom of the head wall, and he's like, you are going on oxygen right now. And he put oxygen on me. And I have this really funny video, because all of a sudden I took off up this head wall at a speed never before seen. And I stopped midway because I was so happy all of a sudden that I wanted to make a video to document my current state of bliss. And and in the video, I'm like, I was being a complete animal, and now I am so happy with the world, and everybody is awesome. And that's what oxygen can do for you if you've deteriorated into a place like that. It will completely turn you around.
Wow, that's amazing. It makes me wonder if Max isn't mixing a little something in his oxygen.
Now, if you're feeling like normal, and when I say normal, I mean normal for altitude, putting oxygen on doesn't make you suddenly feel awesome. I would say it more stops you from deteriorating the way you would if you didn't put oxygen on.
Right.
By now, you certainly know who Bent Gate is. That's for a great reason. Bent Gate Mountaineering has been sponsoring the Adventure Sports Podcast almost from the beginning, and we really appreciate that. They've made it possible for all the great shows to continue coming your way. We want to say thanks by reminding you to go to them for your backcountry gear. If you live in Colorado, then just stop by their store in Golden. If not, go to bentgate.com. They have what you need, from the latest ultralight gear to the tried and true classics for climbing, hiking, and camping, like Arc'teryx, Hilleberg, Nemo, Western Mountaineering, and many more. Need advice? They have you covered there too. Their staff are passionate adventurers who can offer help from their own experiences. Bent Gate also hosts lots of events and speakers. Check out their website to see the schedule and to see all of their products. Help take care of the Adventure Sports Podcast by getting your gear from Bent Gate Mountaineering.
Well, it sounds like you probably described your worst day on the mountain with the whole snow blindness thing. What was your best time, and on which mountain?
Oh, my best time on the mountain. I guess, my best time on the mountain would be in 2012, I did a bunch of climbs, and I ended up going from I climbed Lhotse, which is beside Everest. That I think is the 5th highest mountain. And, that was a climb for me where I remember why I climbed Lhotse. I climbed Lhotse because I didn't feel ready for Everest. Someone had been saying, you can come to Everest, you'll do great, yada, yada. And I just had it in my mind that no, I'd been doing a bunch of other climbing and challenging myself more technically in that, but I still didn't feel like I was ready for it. I really thought Everest was like a big deal. And so I chose Lhotse, which is quite funny to people who climb 8,000 meter peaks, because most people would say that Lhotse is more difficult than Everest. But I just kind of looked at it from an altitude point of view at that point. And so I went to do Lhotse, and that was sort of the climb for me where I felt like, okay, I've picked up a bunch of technical skills. Like I'd gone off and done some alpine rock courses and started some rock climbing stuff. And then I'd, started some ice climbing. And so I was starting to feel like I kind of was starting to have a clue. I didn't feel so much like a poser anymore, really. Like I actually could, tie some knots and look like I knew what I was doing. And a lot of people don't learn that, or never get to that, or just let other people do that and don't sort of take the time to learn that. But I always I'd come to the conclusion that, okay, if I'm going to keep doing this, I want it to slowly but surely get better at it and know how to take care of myself. So when I got to Lhotse, I kind of felt like, yes, I can climb that mountain. I don't want to climb a mountain that I don't think I can climb. This one I can climb. And everything kind of just came off perfectly. And in fact, we had this horrible summit weather day, but it was me and another girl. It's great. I end up climbing with girls often, which is, sort of not a common thing on 8,000 meter peaks. And Arnold, who was the guide, and he was positive we were going to turn around because the weather was absolutely terrible. But we were just so happy and doing so well that we were like, no, let's keep going. And it was just this sort of rah girl power thing. And we got to the top, and he's like, I can't believe you guys did that. Like, I'm so happy to be here because I haven't summited this either. So, but I really can't believe you guys kept going. So I felt like it was the culmination of all the work that I had put in since 2010 through to then. And then I went off. And so I was really happy on Lhotse. I just thought it was like this culmination moment, and everything had just gone right. And we'd done it right. And then I went off to Pakistan for the first time and had this wonderful time on Broad Peak. We didn't summit. And that was a low moment for me because it was the first time I hadn't, by that point I was summiting every 8,000 meter peak that I was climbing. Right. So I kind of thought that I was just going to keep summiting everything that I climbed, Right. And then I got to Broad Peak and Pakistan is just notorious for shutting people down. And Pakistan is this horrible place for weather, and the mountains are tough there. Absolutely. And did summit Broad Peak. And so I was on this low. So I'd been on Lhotse on this high, and then I was kind of on this I remember I was crying when I decided that, well, we all decided we were going down, but somebody had said, do you want to stay and we'll, leave your team and come with me and we'll go and climb. And I'd said, I can't leave my team, but it was a devastating moment for me, thinking, should I stay? Should I go? I can't believe I'm walking away from this mountain.
Yeah, it's gotta be tough.
Yeah. Well, it was, the first time is tough. It's absolutely tough. But I walked away from it and got back to Skardu, which is, sort of the town you go to when you leave the mountains, and decided I was going to go climb a 7,000 meter peak called Spantic because someone else is going there. And I said, I'm going to come to you then. And we went there, and that ended up being one of my, I think till this day, my most memorable high, because there was 3 of us who ended up climbing in the end. And the mountain was in incredibly bad shape that year. It was just deep snow, cornices, all this, it's not supposed to be a very difficult mountain. It's just supposed to be a straightforward, ridge climb, without a lot of danger, but it ended up being a really dangerous mountain. And we just, we were falling into crevasses, falling through cornices, dealing with, post holing for, hours at a time. And, on our summit day, we ran into sugar snow. And Brad characterized it as this superhuman force that overtook Grace, because she just commenced into this routine of okay, knee up, push snow down, take foot, push snow down, next,
It sounds exhausting.
And it went, and he couldn't believe it. He was like, I don't even know how she's doing that. But I think I'd just come off of my first 8,000 meter no summit. Right. I think it was the first time I had some very serious summit fever as well. I wanted that summit. I remember wanting it really bad. And in truth, we pushed the time frame, me and him, for sure. I actually made him push it. And that that's not a smart way to be on a mountain, but we made the summit. We were really, really happy and really impressed with ourselves. And only 2 other people had made the summit that year. So it was great. And that, I think, was just a moment. Again, that whole year to me felt like there was a lot of growth. I'd come a really long way since I'd started. And suddenly I was able to climb things that I never would have thought I could climb before. Suddenly I was the person who was being the badass that would push through to the summit, and also because on Spantic things were so dangerous, we were having to do a lot of rope work, and I was quite competent at that point in doing all those things. So it just felt like a real year of growth for me, 2012.
Oh, I'm sure. That
So in
sounds
Spantic
great.
in particular.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about women in high altitude climbing. You don't hear about it a lot. Obviously, it exists, but it seems to be a small percentage. But it sounds like you're running into quite a few up there when you get up there.
Yeah, it's changing. I don't know if it's changing or not. I guess it's changing certainly on the popular mountains because I've ended up being on some popular mountains lately, and so I'm seeing a lot more women around, and I think that means that eventually there's going to be more women on the less popular mountains. We're out there. We've always been out there. It's just that it used to be that there was only one of us on any team, you know? So it'd be like one woman and a bunch of guys. And, that's not problematic. It's nice to have more women around. I've been lucky to meet Violetta in 2010 and then Mia in 2012. And I've had the chance to climb with Violetta, I think 2 or 3 times since then. And Mia and I have yet to get back together, but I'm sure we will at some point. It's always, I don't know that it's any harder, right? Like I have no problem sharing tents with guys and versus girls. Sometimes I think I don't like the assumption that, if there's 2 girls on a team, let's put them together or they're going to be best buddies. Kind of thing. I always think that's quite funny. Like,
it's not always the case for either sex.
Right? Yeah. So, I mean, there are sort of funny things like that come up, but it's always nice to have female members around because you end up, getting a toilet for the girls because the boys are just too messy in theirs. And, yeah, so it's there's some bonuses, but you know what I really like about being a woman in this sport is I think altitude is just the greatest equalizer on earth. I remember this moment on Broad Peak. There's this really big guy from Iceland. I mean, he was huge. I'm like 5'2". I'm a small person, at least in size, not in personality, but and this guy was easily over 6 feet and big long legs, and I just came climbing up and past him, and I just kept going. And I remember from behind me, he like stopped and he was like, "I don't get it. Your legs are like this long, and my legs are like this long. Like, how are you doing that?"
Watch me, buddy. That's awesome.
But it's a forum where sort of human beings exist. It's not the sex kind of disappears to a great extent, other than maybe I would say load carrying.
Right.
Because we're just, I do find like I've definitely gotten way stronger, and I'm good at carrying my own load. I'm not very good at taking the same load as some guy that's like 6'3" and 200 pounds. It definitely has a different impact on me than on him when we put on heavy packs. So,
well, you just learned to pack a little bit lighter. buy better equipment.
I mean, of course,
right?
Yeah. I buy really light equipment, and people sometimes will like pick up my pack and they'll be like, "Oh my God, like mine's so much heavier." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I have a 5-foot sleeping bag and you have a 6-foot sleeping bag.
That's right.
And all my clothes are way smaller and my boots are smaller and all of that." So I do make an effort to try to keep my equipment as light as possible, so that in terms of the other equipment that I have to carry, it's at least I'm starting from a lighter point. But also there's a lot of guys who will be like, "No, you don't have to carry an equal pack to me. You've got to carry what's reasonable for your size, and what's reasonable for my size is more. So, I'm going to take more." And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all about learning how to pack.
Yeah.
So I was going to have you, have some words of encouragement for other women to get out there and try high altitude climbing, but I think you kind of did it already and all that. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, I mean, I hope so. I wouldn't, sometimes women are, when guys stand around, when a guy stands around a group of guys and says, "Yeah, I'm going to go out and do a solo hike on a 14 or whatever," a lot of time their buddies will be like, "Yeah, right on, rad, sounds great." When a girl stands around and tells her girlfriends, "I'm going to go out and do a solo hike on a 14, they're going to be like, "Oh my God, that's scary. You're going to be alone. Are you going to be okay?" And I think that it's important for women to kind of take ownership over their own independence and not be afraid to go out on their own. The wilds and the trails and all that are generally quite safe. The things that you worry about in your head are not things that you should spend too much time worrying about. You can be safe. You can stay in contact with the outside world. But there's no reason you can't get out there and do the same things as the guys. And, I used to be afraid of hiking on my own. I really did. And I realized I was really stupid. So just start with like a simple hike that's maybe like an hour and a half long, and do it on your own without your girlfriends or without your boyfriend, and just kind of take back your independence, and it'll feel really great. I think more women need to do that. And I think more women also need to be supportive of other women doing that, as opposed to kind of transmitting those very feminine ideas of, oh, you're going to be alone, and what if somebody hurts you, kind of.
No, I agree. And that's why I like to ask it, because, one news story can ruin a million mindsets when it comes to something like that. Mm-hmm. And, you hear the news story and you think, okay, surely that's going to happen to me. But, if you ever look at statistics on stuff like that, you can't let that limit you. You have to get out there and live your own life and have the willingness to blow all that to the side and enjoy yourself.
Mm-hmm. And start small, and that'll probably make you more comfortable. And when it comes to climbing and mountaineering, don't think that like men have some kind of innate ownership over it. Most of them have no clue what they're doing in the beginning too.
Probably still don't have a clue even while
right?
they're doing it.
Yeah. And, women are really good at, allowing themselves to be bad in the beginning and learn and get better. Often, and this is not true across the board, but there's a lot of women who just don't have a lot of ego associated with performing well in the outdoors. And that's a wonderful thing, because the first thing you need to do when you do this is to learn a lot of stuff. And don't be ashamed of like, oh, I need somebody to teach me. Find somebody to teach you, and just be a really good learner. And you will get better at it. And then eventually you're going to find that you know more than the guys. And yeah, they'll be showing off and trying to look cool, but at the end of the day, you'll know more of how to do it and be better.
Right. Well, when it comes to guides, what about female guide groups? Have you run into that, or maybe that's what you need to be yourself?
Have I ever had no, I mean, it's far too late for me to become a certified mountain guide. I also think that, for people that are interested in guiding, that's a very specific career choice. You do need to love climbing, but if climbing is all that you love, then you probably shouldn't become a guide. You need to love teaching people. And I don't know if I have the patience for teaching people that really want to learn. I don't have the patience for teaching people that just want somebody else to do everything for them, because, high altitude mountains are not a place where that can happen.
Yeah, and you're going to get all kinds up there. You're not going to get the cherry picked ones, for sure.
Yeah, you absolutely do. In terms of female guides, have I had female guides? I'm just thinking, I've never had a female guide. I'm not against having a female guide. I've seen female guides in action on the mountain. There's not a lot of them, though. I'll say that. Maybe there's not enough of us trying. I suspect part of it is also that, like any profession, I mean, this happens in law. If you decide you want to have kids and a family, being out and running around the world, for months at a time isn't really conducive to that.
Right.
As much as it can be for men, men manage to make it work. It's a whole other level of challenge for women to do that. I'm sure part of it also is, there's a bit of a competitive culture sometimes within, all types of climbing, and that doesn't always resonate well with women. So I think they just kind of step to the back and say, okay, I don't want to be a part of that. But I think women in the mountain can be an incredibly wonderful addition to it. Just, their way of dealing, their interaction on a human level with people who are going through tough times can actually be quite useful. Talking people through things. And women are a great resource for anybody, man or woman, to feel weak around and express weakness around. And one of the hardest things on a mountain for a lot of men and even some women is being honest about how they're feeling and showing weakness.
Right.
Whereas if you have a female guide, they can often be better. And I've met plenty of male guides who are great at this too. But it is a certain talent as a guide to get people to level with you and tell you the truth about how they're feeling. Not because you're going to kick them off the mountain, but so that you can manage what's going on.
You can help them help themselves at that point.
Totally. And I think women certainly have on a maybe a better level of communication on an emotional level often that could be quite useful, certainly at high altitude. Now, they're not going to be the person who's going to, a lot of people will be like, oh, I don't want a female guide. She can't like pick me up and throw me over her shoulder if I'm in trouble. And it's like, well, none of them can.
Right. Yeah, if that's what you're expecting out of this whole thing, you might want to go into a different hobby.
Exactly. You're going to need at least like 4 really strong guys for that. So no, it's, I hope we see more. I don't know if we will, but I think people should really remain open to it because women can be incredibly good teachers, incredibly patient. And even for men, I think a great example to learn from. And yeah, I wouldn't hesitate.
Yeah, I can't agree anymore. Well, if you guys want a little bit of inspiration, go check out Grace's Facebook page and her Instagram page. There are some amazing photos and write-ups of her outings on these mountains. You can find her at Mountain Climb Grace at both social media outlets. And check it out. Hit up Grace if you're thinking about getting into high-altitude climbing. And I'm sure she'll be happy to answer a few of your questions and maybe give you that little push to the edge that you need. So, Grace, it was awesome talking to you. We've blown through an hour easily. I really appreciate your time coming on.
Oh no, yeah, we that went by really fast.
It did.
Yeah, no, and I'm always happy for anybody who wants just advice or encouragement. Just message me or comment on my pictures. I love to. If I could be responsible for just one person going on their first mountain climb, I would be so honored.
Cool. Right on. Well, that's cool. I hope somebody hits you up and is inspired to get out there themselves. So, all right, Grace. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show, and hopefully you've inspired some people to get out there and try some things.
Hope so.
All right.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you know somebody that would make a good guest on the show, or if you have a pretty cool story about the outdoors or adventure sports that you want to tell us, please call us and leave a voicemail at 812-MAIL-POD. That is 812-624-5763. You can also send us an email at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. Again, it is always helpful to leave us a review on iTunes. And if you'd like to be a supporter of the show, you can give $5 a month at patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. And links for all that stuff is also in the show notes. So thanks again for listening. And y'all get out there and do something so you can be on the show one day. All right, later. Don't forget, if you want to save 20% off the best backpacking food you're ever going to eat, go to peakrefuel.com and use ASP20 at checkout.